Masechet Moed Katan Daf Amud Aleph 24:8-1. Ba mine Rabbi Yochanan mi Shemuel. Asks Rabbi Yochanan from Shemuel. Yesh avilut b'Shabbat or en avilut b'Shabbat? Is there din avilut on Shabbat or not? So Amalei comes and he tells him en avilut b'Shabbat. There is no avilut in Shabbat. So Yatvi Rabbanan kamed Rav Papa v'kamri mishmed Shemuel. So the Talmidei Chachamim that were sitting in front of before Rav Papa, and they said in the name of Shemuel, Avel sheshimesh mitato bimei evlo. When a person is an avel, that he has tashmish mita, he has marital relations during the time of zavelut, chayav mita. He's chayav mita bidei shamayim. Yeah, he's chayav mita bidei shamayim. Okay, so Amar lehu Rav Papa comes and he says, asur. It's just asur. He's not chayav mita bidei shamayim. You know what it is? Chayav mita bidei shamayim. It's asur, and that's it. Itmar, it was stated. Umishmed Rabbi Yochanan Itmar, and the name of Rabbi Yochanan it was stated. If it was heard in front of Shmuel, this is what you actually heard. It says of Baravim in the name of Shmuel, Avel shelo para veshelo pirem hayam mita. An avel that did not pay, right, which means he did not make his hair longer or did not tear his clothing, hayam mita. He's going to be hayam mita. Shneimar says in a pasuk, Rashechem al tifrau. You're not going to die. So it's mashma that another avel, if he did not leave his hair long or he did not tear his clothing, it's going to be chayam mita. Amar Rafram bar Papa, says Rafram bar Papa, Tana, we learned about avel rabati. Avel is asuli shamesh mitato be'evlo. An avel is not allowed to have relations right during his avelut. Maaseh be'echad shesh mitato be'evlo ve'shamtu chazirim gviyato. So what happened is that he was punished min hashemayim, that a person had tashmish mita when he was in the middle of his avilut, and the chazirim, the pigs, they bit him in his male organ and they cut it off. Oh. That was the punishment of what that he did. Amar Shemuel, says Shemuel, pahaz, right, is chova. Natar is a reshut. What is pahaz? Priyata rosh, pay for priyata rosh, right? Which means that he has to take off the kisuya rosh of the avel. So taking off the kisuya rosh of the avel, that means during the Yomot HaChol, the avel used to come and used to give me a tef rosho with as a siman as avelut. Okay, but he says over here, in their country, this is the Ramah bringing it down. They do not have the minhag, and that's why I told you that even nobody has this minhag. Right, but rather they do like a min atifa. Okay, so this was done during the weekday. Chazarat kera la'acharav, they used to turn it to the back side. Okay, which means they used to put it on the back. This is talking about on Shabbat, which means that even though during the week a person had to cover his head as a sign of avilut, on Shabbat he takes it off. Even though during the week, right, he had the kriya in the front, he used to turn it to the back. Zakifat amita, he used to put the bed back normally. That's a chovah. That means, that's a chovah that he has to do on Shabbat, which means because you're not allowed to do avilut b'Shabbat. Anything which is publicly seen, you're not allowed to display. So therefore, your bed has to be normal. The way of the atifat rosh, the way that they used to put their head, the same thing normal. Everything was done normally. Okay?
We're doing one daf.
That's the Gemara. Neilata sandal, tashmish amita, rechitzat yadayim. That is the natar. Remember, we said that pahaz is a chovah on Shabbat. What was the pahaz? Taking off the kisuya rosh, showing that he's an avel, hazarat akera, which means that they used to turn it the other way around so nobody would be able to see it, and zakifat amita, putting the bed normally. What is natar? Neilata sandal, tashmish amita, and rechitzat yadayim ragayim mechamin arvit, right? That's going to be reshut. What does that mean? On Shabbat, if he wants, he could do it. If he wants, he doesn't want to do it. Meaning that it all depends on him. So you see from here, right, that even though right, that tashmish amitan rechitza ma'im chavim is all the chiyuvim of the navel during the shiva. He's not obligated to stop himself on Shabbat, right? Because these are things of dvarim shebetzina, which means since it's not going to be nikar, all these things, so therefore, right, there's no problem. So therefore, he says over here, it doesn't look like on the outside that he's doing avilut on Shabbat. So if he wants, he could sustain from them. If not, then he doesn't need to. Okay, so says the Gemara. Rav is going to argue on this. And Rav says, Af priyata rosh reshut. Even priyata rosh is a reshut, which means he's not obligated to take off the kisuya rosh or no. Okay? Now, obviously, we're going to have to analyze every single part of this when it said to do with, right, to do with the avelut on Shabbat. So says the Gemara, Shmuel, and according to Shitat Shmuel, Maishna Ni'ilata Sandal de Reshut. What is the reason why Ni'ilata Sandal is a Reshut, right, different than Priyat Rosh? Not everybody has shoes. Not everybody is revealing their head. So therefore, why do they have to do that? So says the Gemara, Shmuel goes according to his reasoning. Shmuel, because says Shmuel, any type of a kriya in a clothing which is not done during the shat chimum, eno kera. It's not considered a tearing. And any atifa which is not atifat yishmelim, and atifa is not going to be an atifa, and therefore the avel, right, is not going to be a chovah. So since according to Shitat Shmuel, the avel is obligated to be mitatef b'tzura zu k'atifat yishmelim, right? So it doesn't look like a regular kisui rosh. So therefore everybody knows that it's a true siman of avelut, and therefore on Shabbat he's not allowed to do it. So Machvi Rav Nachman. This is the Chazarat Kera Le'achorav, where you see that he puts it on the behind him. Okay, and then the next one. No, we don't have another one. The Atifat Yishmaelim was probably before. This is, by the way, the chart that they did. That it says over here that he's going to be chayav in Priyat Rosh, meaning revealing his head. He's going to be chayav in putting the tear on behind him. He's going to be chayav in putting the bed normally. Tashmish Amita is going to be mutar, right? In Shitat Shemuel, even though Rabbi Yochanan says it's asur. Okay? Ni'ilata Sandal is going to be mutar, but it's not chayav. And Rechitzat Yadayim is going to be mutar, but not chayav. Yetifat Yishmaelim, let me just check if we have it here. Yeah. Okay? Now it says like this. It says, Machmi Rav Nachman ad gubed dikna. So Rav Nachman came and he showed, right, until where is the Atifat Rosh of the Yishmaelim? Ad gubed dikna. Until Shikea Zakan, which means the Gumea Lechi. Okay? That's where it is. Amar Rabbi Yaakov, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Says Rabbi Yaakov in the name of, yes. Yeah? Until the Zakan. So he says like this. Says Rabbi Yaakov in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Says Rabbi Yaakov in the name of Yochanan, Loshanu ela she'en lo minalayim biraglav. That's only if a person does not have shoes for Shabbat. Aval im yesh lo minalayim biraglav, minalav mochichim alav, which means the fact that he has regular shoes, that's a hochacha that he's not doing avelut. So therefore, he doesn't have to take off the Priyat Rosh, meaning the Kisuya Rosh, meaning it's a hochacha that he's not doing it. This is the famous concept that we speak about. For example, we have an Isur of Bal Tosif, right? You're not allowed to add on to the mitzvot. So it comes, let's say, for example, on Simchat Torah, and you're not allowed to eat in the sukkah. Because if you eat in the sukkah on Simchat Torah, it's like Bal Tosif. So what do? What happens if it's nice outside? Yeah, it's not like here. Here it's boiling hot. Nobody wants to be there. But let's say it's in, it's beautiful. So you want to be in the sukkah. Why don't you want to be in the sukkah? But now you have an isur. So what do? Right? You come and you either cover the schach, so you make the sukkah pasul, or you come and you do the kiddush and amosi inside the house. You understand? You do something which is mochiach that you're not doing it for sukkah. So now it becomes permitted. What? No. Let's say you covered it before Yom Tov, right? Or even on Yom Tov, even if you covered it. What's the problem?
No, I'm asking you.
You got a goy, whatever it is that they covered. You left it a tefach open before Yom Tov, and then you just closed it. Yeah? So what happened is that in any cases where you're going to be mochiach, right, that there's no din of avelut, it's going to be permitted. So it's in here. He has shoes. If he has regular shoes, obviously he's not doing avelut. He's also got atifat rosh. Doesn't matter, because the fact that he has shoes, he's already showing that he's not doing regular avelut. Okay. Next, kol kera she'eno b'shat chimum ena kera. What does it mean that any kera, kol kera she'eno b'shat chimum eno kera, any type of a kriya which is not b'shat chimum, which means during the time, right? Meaning when a person's hot, when he's angry, when he's upset, when he's sad. So it's eno kera. It's not considered a kera. So says the Gemara, Veha amru lei Shemuel. Says Shemuel, right? He comes and he says Shemuel. Says the Gemara, amru lei Shemuel. He told Shemuel, nach nafshe yad Rav, that passed away Rav. So he went and he tore 12 different clothings, right, because of tza'ah, which means mamash, he was suffering. So he tore 12 different clothings. Amar, he went and he said, Azal Gavra Dava Mistafina Mineh. He said the person went to his world that I was afraid of him. Right? So Amrule Rav Yochanan, they went and they told Rav Yochanan, Nachdam Shed Rav Chanina passed away. He went and he tore 13 clothing of silk. Amar Azal Gavra Dava Mistafina, meaning he was afraid, meaning that such a big chacham passed away, he was afraid of him in his learning. So because of that, he went and he tore, right, 13 clothing, right, to show how, right, what it was. Again, but this is talking about that the chachamim were doing it shelo b'shat chimum, because they went and they told him it wasn't right away. It was mashma even afterwards. So he answers the Gemara, Shane Rabbanan, it's different the rabbis. The kevan the choshat tamid kashmatayu kishat chimum dami. By the chachamim, it's something completely different. By a person that passes away, it has to be b'shat chimum. It has to be during the time when they're remembering. It's mamash there. By the chachamim, when do the rabbis remember? You know, the rabbis remember all the time. Why? You're learning a Gemara, and also you remember, what he used to say in this Gemara. Rav Chanin, so all the time you're remembering. Since all the time you're remembering, all the time it's considered kishat chimum, and therefore they were able to tear, even though it was not considered shat chimum. Amale Ravin bar Ada Rava, says Ravin bar Ada to Rava. Amar Talmidach Rav Amram, right? Said your student Rav Amram, right? Tanya, we learned in a Braita, Avel kol shiva koro lefanav. An Avel, all the 7 days, he has to tear, and the tear has to be in front of him. Bimba leachlif, machlif vekorea. What happens if he wants to change his clothing? He changes his clothing, but he has to tear the new clothing as well. Right? That means he changes, but he has to tear the new clothing as well. Right? The Shabbat, if it's on Shabbat, koro leacharav. Right? He has to take it, he has to put it on the back, behind him, like we showed the picture before. And he turns the clothing towards his back. Now, if he wants to change his clothing, Shabbat, he changes his clothing, but he doesn't do kriya. And that's how we do nowadays as well. The exact same halacha. If somebody, obviously, lechatchila, they're not supposed to change their clothing. But if a person, mamash, had to change his clothing, right, during the Shivat Yimei Avelut, right? For example, it says that, it changed the, the mezeg aviv. For example, it changed, all of a sudden it was hot to cold or cold to hot. Or, whatever the case is. And now he has to change the clothing. He has to do a new kriya. And it's obviously, right? And if it's going to be, this is during the entire Shiva. The entire Shiva, doesn't matter which day of the Shiva, he has to do kriya again. And to do with the other one on Shabbat, he doesn't have to tear the clothing for the Shabbat. So says the
Gemara, he puts it behind?
No. The Alachal Maaseh, they change their clothing and then that's it. And they don't have to tear it. That's what we just said. Okay? Now, says the Gemara, right? He says, what we're saying now is the Braita is saying that an Avel that changes his clothing within the Shiva, he has to do again the kriya, but it wasn't shat chimum. So answers the Gemara, Kitanya hi bichvod aviv imo. He says when a person is going to be mitabel al aviv imo, he has to also tear the clothing that he changed, not because it's the chova of the kriya, because we already said the kriya has to be b'shat chimum, which is mamash b'shat amita, right? But what is it? It's because of the kavod of aviv imo. So because of the kavod of aviv imo, that's what he has to do. Okay. Now he says, if he says over here, if the person is going to be mitabel on other people, so then he doesn't have to do the kriya, just like the shita of Shemuel. So there's a difference here between the father and the mother and other people, according to this. Okay? Otan kraim, that which they have to tear, okay, in the new clothing. Remember, not in the old clothing, in the new clothing. Mitachin o eno mitachin. Are you allowed to sew it up together or not? So remember, yesterday we already learned the difference between sholel or mitacheh, okay, which means that you sew it, but not good sewing, meaning you could tell, or mitacheh was mamash, that you put it back to normal, that kilu, it's almost back to normal. So pligi ba'avua de Rav Oshaya bar kapara. There's a machlok between the father of Oshaya and bar kapara. Chadamar, one of them says emitachin, they're not allowed to put them back together, right? When he's doing it for his father and his mother. The Chadamar, one of them says mitachin, they are allowed to put it back together. Right? He doesn't do it. So who did he hear it from? Isn't it from his father? Says the Gemara, no. Maybe he heard it from his rabbi, because his rabbi was bar kapara. So since his rabbi was bar kapara, maybe he heard it from his rabbi and not from his father. Amar Rava, Rava says, Avel metayel be'unkli betoch beto. An Avel is allowed to be mistovev inside of his house when he's going to be wearing the torn clothing. Okay, which means, because again, this is betzina. So since it's betzina, he's allowed to be walking around with his torn clothing on Shabbat, right? And there's no problem, right? Why? He's within his house. Within his house. Okay. So says the Gemara, Rav Yosef. Abaye once found Rav Yosef that he was in his house when he was in Shabbat in Avelut. The Paris Sudra Reshe, that he had the sudar on top of his head like the Avelim. And he was just walking around in his house. Amarle, he told him, no savelo more, en Avelut b'Shabbat. Well, he says, there's no Avelut in Shabbat. Amarle, hachem Rav Yochanan, this is what Rav Yochanan said. Devarim shebetzina noheg. Anything which is tzina, you are noheg. So since you are noheg, devarim shebetzina, right? So therefore, this is where we see that Rav Yochanan argues on Rav and Shmuel, because he holds that, for example, nilata sandal, tashmi shamita v'rechitza, right? You are a sur. I mean, tashmi shamita is something that's tzina. It's not something publicly, right? Marital relations is private. But according to Rav Yochanan, not like Shmuel, it's a sur during Avelut. Why? It's something privately. Anything of privately, there is the concept of Avelut in Shabbat. Tzina. Fine. Rabbi Eliezer says, Mishechara bet hamikdash atzeret keshabbat. Once the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, Shavuot becomes like Shabbat. You remember what we were talking about? Yeah? No, we're not talking about cheese. Right? We're talking about, right, Atzeret Keshabbat. Yeah? What does it mean, Atzeret Keshabbat? Yeah, you have to be with us. Yeah? Atzeret Keshabbat. What does it mean? Yeah? He says like this, right? He says, Atzeret is one of the regalim. We learned the regalim are
Ole.
No, what are the regalim? What do they do? What's halachot? Thank you, David.
Ole.
Right? It's not ole. Mafsikim ve'eno olim.
Sorry, Shabbat is ole.
Shabbat is ole ve'eno mafsik. Yeah, one more time. What? Mafsikin is another thing. Yeah? No. Mafsikin is you do afsaka. That's if you stop. Pasek. Ask Baba Haki, what does that say? Yeah,
Masikim is what they do when they keep on talking.
Right? So therefore, and by the way, what I use is Lashon Gemara. I'm not using any other Lashon. The Mishnah says Mafsikin ben amolim, Mafsikin. Right? So says the one more time. The Gemara says Mafsikin ben amolim. What is that? The regalim. Shabbat is ole ve'eno mafsik. What about Shavuot? Why? Shavuot is one day. So says the Gemara, since there's no Tashlumin, since there's no Korbanot, so you don't have the 7 days afterwards anyway of Shavuot. So therefore what? Says the Gemara, Mishechara Bet HaMikdash, this was in the Mishnah where Rabbi Eliezer said, once the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed, Atzeret, which is Shavuot, is like Shabbat, which means it's ole ve'eno mafsik. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Gidal bar Menashe Amar Shmuel, it says Rav Gidal bar Menashe named Shmuel, Halacha is Kerem Gamliel, the Halacha is like Kerem Gamliel, right? Which means not like Rabbi Eliezer, which means that it is still going to be mafsik. So Shavuot is I've it stops it. He's during the Shiva, stops the Shiva. During the Shloshim, stops the Shloshim. Some people they taught that which Rav Gidal ben Menashe comes in Paskin to do this halacha. It says Kol Shoshim Yom Tinok Yotze Bechek. Right, all the 30 days. If a child comes and he dies within the 30 days, so the Tinok is going to go out when he's going to be carried Bechek. What does it mean Bechek? Right, which means mamash, you don't have to come and put him in a coffin or things like that. Mamash, they carry him in their arms. Okay, v'nikbar b'isha achat u'shnei anashim. Right, and he's going to be buried with one woman and 2 men. Okay, which means that he does not need 10 people. Meaning a normal burial needs 10 people. Here you don't need 10 people. It's enough with 3 people. Right? What are the 3 people? 1 woman and 2 men. But not with 1 man and 2 women, because then you have the Yisur of Yichud. Okay, so that's a special halacha. Daled Amubet, 24b, right? Right, Kavdaled Amubet. Abba Shaul says, Af Beish Echad Ushte Nashim. Right, the Kvura could be done even with 1 man and 2 women. That means even though there's an Yisur of Yichud B'derech Klal, Abba Shaul permits it here because since a person's doing his avelut, he doesn't have the any tzro mitkaber elav. Mamash, he's in the middle of avelut of a child, right? That just passed away, right? Within the 30 days, he's not going to start doing, averot. Okay, that's what he holds. They don't do the shura. Remember, they used to do like a shura, right? Like a wall, like a line. Yeah, that Ashkenazim do it, and they go through them, right? By the way, the Moroccans, we used to do a shura, but it was different. It was different. Here, the way that Ashkenazim do it is that the Ashkenazim do a shura, and the Avelim goes through it. By the Moroccans, it was the exact opposite. The Avelim would stay in one place, and the people would make a shura and go around, kissing them one by one, going around that way.
They leave saying,
doing hugging and kissing, yeah, but they stay like that, exactly. That was the shura, and it was a different shura, because they were doing, it's not really a shura, you're walking the line. You understand? They're checking if the guy's half drunk or not. You said they're walking the line. For us, the Avelim stayed put, and the Anashim were doing the shura. And they were making the lawn. Yeah. What? No. Anashim. We don't say Bikat Avelim. They don't do Tanchumei Avelim either. Okay? So this is all to do with within 30 days. Remember that within 30 days, what is it considered? A nefel. That's why. Because it's considered a miscarriage. That means as long as it's not a viable child. A viable child is always after Pidyon Ben. Pidyon Ben is what makes a child, right, viable. So that's why Pidyon Ben is always after 30 yom. Right? It's always 30 days. So within 30 days, the child is not. That's why before 30 days, a lot of people, they don't even take up the child at all. They don't take them out at all. Nothing. Right? Why? Once after 30 days, right? That's when they start. Okay. Right? Not only Ayin because they don't want to do anything. The Chas Shalom within 30 days, mamash, it doesn't have a cheskat chayim. Within 30 days, there's no cheskat chayim. Okay. Ben shloshim, once he becomes 30 days old, yotze b'dluskema. So then he has to come in a small little aron. Rabbi Yudah says, lo b'dluskema nitele b'katef, but not in something which is going to be taken on the shoulder of one person. Ela nitele b'agapayim, but it's taken within the hands of the human being. Right? Ve'omdim alav b'shura, then they do the shura. V'amrim alav b'yikat avelim v'gam chovei avelim. Ben 12 chodesh, once it's 12 months, yotze b'mita, then it goes into a mamash like a coffin. Okay, like a mamash like into a mita, into a bed. Okay? Rabbi Akiva says, Hu ben shana ve'vra keben shtayim, right? Or Hu ben shtayim ve'vra keben shana yotze b'mita. The same halacha would apply that if he's 1 year old, but the evarim were like a 2-year-old, or like a 2-year-old and the evarim are like a ben shana. Right? Sometimes there's a sickness like that, by the way. You have people that they're in their brain, they grow, but their body, right? Sorry, the opposite. The body is growing, but in their mind, they still stay young. Meaning they're not growing, they're not maturing, right? There's a sickness like that, right? Exactly, lobo greens. So that's what we're talking about here. Rabbi Shimon Elazar says, "Hayotze b'mita, rabim matzivim alav." When the child goes out in a mita, like we mentioned before, which is basically after the year, so then rabim matzivim alav, which means everyone is going to be mitztaer ba'alavaya, in the levaya of the person. Eno yotze b'mita, eno rabim matzivim alav. Elazar ben Azariah omer, nikar rabim, if he's already nikar to the people. Right here it says it was ksat yoter gadol, which means shaya ragil latzet min habayit. He used to go out. He used to or rabim mitaskim imo. Eno nikal rabim and right and rabim mitaskim imo. Umahem be'esped. So what's halacha to do with hesped? So they do hesped or not? Rabbi Meir Mishem Rabbi Ishmael omer. Rabbi Meir says the name of Ishmael. Right? Aniyim bnei shalosh. The bnei aniyim aspidim when they're 3 years old and upwards. Ashirim from 5 years old and upwards. It says here because the Bnei Aniyim, Makdinim Naspid, is because the Sped gives Korat Ruach to the family members. And therefore there's much more necessity to be Maspid, the children of Aniyim, because he's going to be Mitzved more because he doesn't have any other simcha other than his children. Right? But he says, right, or because he needs them to help him. So he says, he says here that poor people are more connected to their children because they have to be very mitzamtzem in their own necessities. They have to start, being very exact in their own things. And therefore, they actually come and they put themselves in hunger in order to give to their children. Meaning the more sacrifice that a person has, the more they're connected to the person. So therefore, Bnei Aniyim are more connected to their children than Ashirim. Gemara Mefureshet. Did you see that? Gemara Mefureshet. Says the Gemara, okay, so from the Ashirim b'nei Chamesh, Rabbi Yudah Omer Mishmor, Rabbi Yudah says in his name, Aniyim b'nei Chamesh, Ashirim b'nei Shesh, u'bnei Zekenim ki b'nei Aniyim. So the Ben Zekunim, you know what Ben Zekunim is? When a person is going to be the last child. Okay, why? Because then, right, it says over here, because the Zekunim, they cannot come out. So therefore, they needed the smaller children to come and to help them. So, and there's other reasons as well. Here it says here, because they know that there's not going to be other children afterwards. So therefore, no, Rabbi Yehuda, he said he just picked up the bar. The first shita, which was Rabbi Meir, and the name of Rabbi Shimon says 3 years old and 5 years old. 3 for the Aniyim, 5 for the Dashinim. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rabbi Shimon, no, 5-year-old and 6-year-old. Again, the same klal was there that Aniyim are still more connected to their children than Ashirim. That's why, but he just picked up the bar. Instead of 3 and 5, 5 and 6. But then he added in Bnei Zekenim or Bnei Aniyim. And because of two different reasons. Either because they need the children in order to serve them, because there's Zekenim, they cannot start running around and all these things. Or because of a second reason, it says over here, okay, here it says maybe it could be the Talmidei Chachamim, it's a whole thing over here. Okay, fine. Okay, the next one it says, so the halacha is like Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Mishmael. That means basically they only start the Estadim from 5 years old and Bnei Ashirim from 6 years old. Darash Rabbi Anani bar Sason, Apitcha de Ben Esiyah. So Rabbi Anani bar Sason, he made a derasha at the entrance of the Nasi. And again, what were we talking about? Somebody that buried his deceased on Erev Chag HaShavuot. Yom Echad Lifnei Atzeret, 1 day before Atzeret, Va'atzeret, and Atzeret, Hare Kan Arba Asar. It's going to be considered like 14 days, right, of Avelut within the 30. How do we do this exactly? It says because if the Avelut was 1 day, or even Rega Echad, but that's what we said, even if it's going to be Mamash Miktzat Yom Kikulo of the Avelut before the Regel, so therefore the Regel is going to be Matel the Shiva. So it's as if that the person already did Shiva Yamim of Avelut. Now Rabbi Anani is coming and saying the Yom HaShavuot in itself, since it's a Regel, so therefore it's like another 7 days. So it's going to take off 14 out of 30. So Mimela comes out that Kiru that there was 14 days that passed. So the Avelut now only has to do another 16 days, right, after Chag HaShavuot, and then he's allowed to take a haircut, right? Again, you remember that I already told you this is only to do with other family members and not parents, because parents is not Shloshim, it's Ge'ara. Until you tell them, Ge'ara, that you scream at them, that they look terrible, right, that they look terrible. So therefore, it's nothing to do with the Shloshim. So that means this is only to do with other family members. So what he's trying to say is that now you have 14 days. So imagine, Mamash, if somebody was passed away, Erev Shavuot, they sat Erev Shavuot, and then on Shavuot, right, it came 14 days. Now they count 16, the Gemara. That's it. They finished the Shoshim. And they didn't do really Shiva. How much did they do? Did a half a day of Shiva, or whatever it is. Shama Rabbi Ami ve'ikpad. Rabbi Ami heard this, and he was makpid on Rabbi Anani. Amar, he said, Atu didehi? What, this is his chidush? He says, Rabbi Lazar Amar Rabbi Oshei. This comes from Rabbi Lazar, meaning, what are you coming and saying something in your name? It's not from you. That came from a bigger rabbi. That came from Rabbi Lazar in the name of Oshia. Another story. Darash Rabbi Yitzhak Nafcha Kila Deresh Kaluta. Yom Echad Lifnei Atzeret V'Atzeret Arei Kan Arba Asar, the same name. Shamana Sheshat Ikpid. So again, he was also makpid. Amar Atu, he says, what is his? How do we know that Atzeret Shavuot has Tashlumin of 7 days? Right? Remember, what is Tashlumin? The person did not bring the korban. By which korban? Chagiga and Reya. Right? Olat. Remember, every single chag you have to bring Olat Reya and Shalmeh Chagiga. We learned that in Masechet Chagiga. Yeah. So what happens is that if you remember, we learned, right, that what happens is now like this. This person, he has to bring it on the first day of Yom Tov. He doesn't bring it on the first day of Yom Tov. He has 7 days to make it up. What about Shavuot? Pesach has 7 days. Sukkot has 7 days. What about Shavuot? You only have 1 day of Shavuot. Fine, in the Diaspora you have 2 days, but you only have 1 day. So says the Gemara, how do we know that you have Tashlumin of 7 days? Which means that even afterwards, it's not Chag anymore. But they're allowed to bring the Korban. So how do we know? It says over here, the Chagigan La Riyash Ne'emar, but it says in the Pasuk, B'Chag HaMatzot U'Chag HaShavuot. Just like Chag HaMatzot is Tashlumin Kol Shiva, so to Chag HaShavuot, you should Tashlumin Kol Shiva. So therefore he's coming and says, since it has Tashlumin Kol Shiva, so it's got a din of 7 days. It's the same thing. And by the way, that's the reason why we do not say Tacharonim after Shavuot for 7 days. Here in Chutz La'aretz, some people don't do the 7 days from the second day of Yom Tov. Some people do it right in it. They do it from the first day of Yom Tov. But in Chutz La'aretz, you do it from the second day of Yom Tov, and that's why you have it that you won't do it, the extra day or not the extra day. Ad Bere, right? The Rav Papa, the Rav Avia Saba B'Darash. So they were mechabed Rav Papa to Rav Avia Saba, and he made a drasha. Yom Echad Lifnei Rosh Hashanah v'Rosh Hashanah 14 Yom. The exact same halacha applies to Rosh Hashanah. If you remember, we brought down that there was a machloket, is Rosh Hashanah Kippur like a regel or not? But here, obviously, he's learning that it is going to be like a regel. So for the same thing, just like by Shavuot, if a person sat 1 hour before Shavuot, I say 1 hour, it could be a few hours, it could be a half a day, whatever it is. But right before Shavuot, they sat down. It's considered 7 days, and then the Shavuot in itself is considered 7 days. So to the same halacha would apply in Rosh Hashanah. If they were Yom Echad Lifnei Rosh Hashanah and Rosh Hashanah in itself, right? So therefore, again, you have 14 days, and therefore you only have to do 16 days later. Amar Ravina comes and he says, Hilkach therefore, Yom Echad Lifnei Chag, 1 day before the Chag, v'Chag, and the Chag itself, which is 7 days, u'Shmini Shelo, and Shmini Atzeret, yesh kan 21 Yom. So now it comes out, what about then Erev Sukkot? So if it was Erev Sukkot, so now Erev Sukkot, it cuts off the Shiva, so it's as if he sat Shiva, right? The Sukkot in itself, you've got 7 days, and the Shmini Atzeret is another Chag, so that's another 7 days, so you have 21. So it comes out that if a person was buried Erev Sukkot, and they sat Shiva, right? After Sukkot, it's considered that he already sat for 21 days, so he only has to do 9 days, and he gets a Shushim. Because you have 7 of what he did, right? Because it was 1 day before Sukkot, so that 1 day was considered 7 because the cuts cut off. The 7 days of Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret. Okay, so now says the Gemara, Ravina ikla lesura de prat. Ravina comes and he was by the surah. He was by surah on Nehar Perat. Amale Rav Chaviva misura de prat Ravina. Amar mor Yom Echad lifnei Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah rekan 14. It's 14. Amale ana mistabra Rav Gamliel hudamina. He says what I just said is you tell me Staber to hold that he holds like Rav Gamliel that the Rosh Hashanah is not considered, is not going to be different from the other regalim. Okay, there's different kavanot.
So
if you look
at
but he didn't say that because of that it's going to be 14 days out of the 30. He should say you should do another 6 days. He says the reason why is because Kippur is going to be another 7 days. So therefore, that means Kippur is going to be another 7 days. Yeah. 100%. Next, Mishnah. Yeah, Mishnah on the bottom of Kavdal Damubet, 24b the Mishnah. And Mishnah on the bottom of Kavdal Damubet. En korim velo choltzim ve'em mavrin ela krovav shel met. Who does kriya? So the only people that are doing the kriya on the met, right? Or chalitza, which was, remember, taking off the shoulder. Nowadays we don't have the minhag of doing this. Ve'em mavrin. Mavrin is seudat avrah, which means that right after the burial, the first food that they eat is a seudat avrah. Usually the minhag is doing it with bread and beitzah. Some people do olives, whatever. Some people, whatever it is. Yeah. So that's what we do. Yeah, ela kravav shel met. Only the people which are obligated in avelut. Okay. And which one? Okay. Ve'en mavrin ela mitah zekufa. When do you do the seudat avrah? You do it on mitah zekufa, which means on a normal bed, and not mitah tafucha. Zekufa was that just like on Shabbat. Remember, on an Avel has to turn over his bed, right? On Shabbat, he turns it back. That's called mitah zekufa. The same thing. He does it on mitah zekufa. And then Bezat Hashem, we continue on Sunday with Daf Yomi.